Roger is the CEO and founder of MemoryDealers.com, the first mainstream business to start accepting Bitcoin. And Roger is also the CEO at Bitcoin.com. With an educational background in economics and computer science, Bitcoin caught his attention in late 2010, and he has been a devoted promoter of Bitcoin and the benefits of digital currencies as a technological advance that can greatly enhance the free flow of payments around the world. Roger has invested in numerous Bitcoin-related startups and fondly believes that there are numerous ways that Bitcoin will change the world for the better. Today, Roger will present economic factors leading to Bitcoin's success, to be followed by a Q&A session. Roger.
Thank you so much for that introduction. We actually know what leads to Bitcoin success. We have an 8-year track record, and we have it right here on the screen. And it's the same thing that would make any money a good success. And I've listed the characteristics right there. We can talk about each of them at a time, but one of them in particular has to do a lot with on-chain scaling and the future of Bitcoin. But first, let's talk about what makes good money. Here's a nice list. Let's start with hard to counterfeit. I think anybody who's paying attention to Bitcoin realizes that it's probably the most difficult money that's ever been invented to counterfeit. You have all these computers around the world constantly auditing the Bitcoin network to make sure that nobody's ever able to make a counterfeit Bitcoin. So it's much more difficult to make a counterfeit Bitcoin than it is a counterfeit dollar bill, or even people are making counterfeit gold bars where they have a little bit of gold on the outside and then they put some other, tungsten or some other metal on the inside. So it feels and looks about right, but it's not actually gold. So Bitcoin is incredibly hard to counterfeit. Scarcity, we're seeing right now in a number of countries around the world, when governments print money, they're undermining the scarcity of that money, and it makes it worth less. So that's why anything, the price is set by supply and demand. Bitcoin is obviously scarce. It's built right into the protocol. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins. That's an incredibly important characteristic of Bitcoin, and it leads people to trust and believe in Bitcoin because they know there's not going to be more than 21 million Bitcoins. Again, Bitcoin is divisible, right? You can send 0.00001 Bitcoins to somebody else anywhere in the world. You can divide them down to 8 decimal points just like that. That's much easier to do with Bitcoin than it is with other forms of money. So Bitcoin is incredibly divisible. That's another incredibly important characteristic of money. Good money needs to be homogeneous. Bitcoin, for the most part, is homogeneous, but there's some room for improvement there for sure. Another way of saying that some money is homogeneous is to say that it can be used anonymously. When you receive a dollar bill from somebody, you have no idea how many people had it before you and who those people were. There's some room for improvement with Bitcoin in that area, but Bitcoin is definitely much better than many of other forms of money that have existed around the world. And durable, of course. Bitcoin is basically just a big number on this ledger that's replicated on tens of thousands of computers around the world. That's pretty darn durable. Bitcoin's likely to be around as long as the internet is around. That's going to be a pretty darn long time. And I should have started with easy to store. We're going to skip the one that we're going around clockwise on this chart, but easy to store. Of course, Bitcoin's easy to store. If you're careful and you know what you're doing, you can have all sorts of backup copies. You can't have backup copies of gold. You can't have backup copies of silver. You can't have backup copies of dollar bills either. Whereas with Bitcoin, you can make backup copies and save them in a bunch of different places around the world on different computers or different devices. And if you lose one of them, you still have all your other backups. Or if you use Bitcoin on your mobile phone and your phone gets lost or stolen or broken, if you still have your backup, your money's just fine. And you can't do that with things like gold or even dollar bills. But I think the main point about this whole conference today and everything is good money needs to be easy to transport. I've been using Bitcoin personally myself for coming up on 6 years now. Bitcoin in the early days especially was incredibly easy to transport. You could send and receive any amount of Bitcoin with anyone anywhere in the world, more often than not for free. And when there was a fee, initially it was just a fraction of a penny. And then as the Bitcoin network became a bit more congested, that raised from a fraction of a penny to a penny, and then 2 pennies, and then 4 pennies, and then 10 pennies, and then sometimes $1. And then very recently, earlier this week, I paid $25 for a single Bitcoin transaction that had multiple inputs and just 2 outputs. So with Bitcoin.com, we receive lots of incoming payments from various customers. And then if we want to move all the money to somewhere else, maybe we'll have 30 or 40 or 50 or even 100 inputs. It cost $25 earlier this week to send a Bitcoin transaction. That's because the network has been running at 100% full capacity for the last 6 months or so, and everybody's having to bid against each other to have room in the 1 megabyte block space there. That network congestion is undermining and destroying and eroding Bitcoin's ease of transport. And for something to be considered good money and to be useful as money, it has to be really easy to transport. And Bitcoin is losing that easiness of transport. And that's an incredibly important thing. So if we look at the underlying economic factors of what has made Bitcoin a success, we know because we have about an 8-year track record. And that was Bitcoin transactions being very, very safe, very, very cheap, very, very fast, low risk of the double spending transactions. Pretty much all transactions were included in the very next block all the time. And just recently, that's really been changing. And it really, really, really concerns me when I see a number of people, that are part of the current Bitcoin core team intentionally doing their best to undermine the ease of transport when it comes to Bitcoin. And they're happy and excited about the fact that it's becoming more and more expensive for someone to send Bitcoin from one person to another. That's terrifying for anybody who understands what makes good money money, or what makes anything money, right? So if we want Bitcoin to be adopted by more and more people around the world, we just need to follow the track and the path that we've had for the last 8 years, because it's worked incredibly well. It's grown Bitcoin from basically nobody using it to now millions of people around the world using it. It's grown Bitcoin from being worth less than 10 cents each when I first heard about it to worth $700 and something today. And major retailers, everybody around the world has heard about Bitcoin if they're in tech at this point, and even people who aren't in tech, maybe they've heard of it at this point. And so if we know this path has worked to lead to such incredible adoption and growth and attention from around the world, don't change it. Continue on the path that we know for sure works. And maybe, layer 2 technologies are probably a good idea and will probably enable lots of interesting things, but don't undermine, don't destroy, don't damage the path and the roadmap that we've had for Bitcoin to this point that's brought us to where we are today, because it obviously works. It has an 8-year history of working. So that's why I agreed to come and be part of this conference, is don't undermine the characteristics that have made Bitcoin a success. And the full blocks and Bitcoin running at 100% capacity, and the fee market that people are having to bid against each other to get included in a Bitcoin block, that's undermining Bitcoin's ease of transport. And that's a big, big, big problem for the future of Bitcoin. And I think a lot of the people that support this fee market and this sort of thing, recently on my Twitter, I mentioned that when something costs more, people will use less of it. And that applies to Coca-Cola, that applies to cigarettes, it applies to absolutely anything, including Bitcoin. If Bitcoin transactions cost 10 cents, fewer people make Bitcoin transactions than if they cost 1 cent. And if Bitcoin transactions cost $10, fewer people will make them than if they cost $1. And there's lots of different options. People might use a credit card, they might use a wire transfer, they might use physical cash, they might use a different cryptocurrency, or they might just not bother with doing the transaction at all. That's another possibility. So people need to understand that we know what's been the success for Bitcoin. We know what brought Bitcoin to where it is today. Don't change it. Continue on the path that we know does work. Don't destroy it. Don't damage it in the hopes of creating something on top of that. So that's basically what I wanted to point out to people. And I'm happy to answer some questions. I believe there's a text box where people can enter some of those questions in, and I'm happy to do that. So. And don't be shy in regards to that. And again, it's been an amazing, amazing, wild, fun time to be involved in Bitcoin for all these years. To think that the actual problem that we're having today is that so many people are using Bitcoin that the network's having a hard time keeping up with it. That's a good problem to have. So, so we have the first question from Rob, and he's asking, how do you think the impasse between core and unlimited should be addressed? And a lot of people are really concerned about hard forks, but I really feel that the current core team, they're afraid of hard forks. They're afraid of software hard forks, but what they don't seem to understand or realize that they're intentionally advocating a hard fork in the economic code of Bitcoin. They're fundamentally trying to change the underlying economic code of Bitcoin, and that's a hard fork that's every bit as serious and dangerous as any hard fork to the software code of Bitcoin. That's a problem. Don't hard fork the economic code of Bitcoin. We know it's working. I think changing the underlying economic code of Bitcoin at this point is even more dangerous than changing the underlying software code of Bitcoin. So there's 1,000 different altcoins people can choose from. If this continues to be a problem and Bitcoin has less characteristics that make it good money than some other altcoin, eventually people may start using some other altcoin, although Bitcoin has a giant head start when it comes to the network effect of the ecosystem that's been built around Bitcoin. But that's not a guarantee that people will always use Bitcoin. And we've seen other currencies around the world collapse and go away. I want to see Bitcoin win in the end. I'm holding far more Bitcoin than any other altcoin or anything else. And by far, the majority of my net worth in this world is in Bitcoin. I want to see Bitcoin win. But if people change the underlying economic code of Bitcoin, I think Bitcoin being the winner in the end is a much less likely thing to happen. So, and the next question here is, what do you think of the importance of the network effect is, by Alex? So the network effect is incredibly important. If I go on the street and ask somebody, hey, have you heard of Bitcoin? Maybe I have a 50-50 chance of them saying yes in most English-speaking countries around the world at this point. If I ask them if they've heard of Dogecoin or Monero or Zcash or Zcoin or take your pick of the other 1,000 currencies out there, I doubt I have a 1 in 100%, 1 in 100 chance of them having heard of one of those other altcoins. So the network effect is incredibly, incredibly important. And so that's one of the biggest things that Bitcoin has going for it, but it doesn't mean that something else can't surpass it. So don't destroy or disrupt or change or alter the underlying economic code of Bitcoin that we know works. And again, looking back at my time of Bitcoin, I remember it was the CES, the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. And this probably was January of 2012. And I was there with the BitPay guys, helping them man their booth, telling people about Bitcoin. And in the background behind us, we had a copy of the blockchain.info block explorer, and it would beep every time that there was a Bitcoin transaction. And today, if you have the beeping, I think they probably got rid of the beeping altogether, but previously, if you still had the beeping turned on, it would just turn into a tone, because there's just a constant stream of Bitcoin transactions happening when you look at that page. That wasn't the case back in 2012. There was maybe one Bitcoin transaction every couple of minutes, and just a few Bitcoin transactions per block every 10 minutes. And while we were talking to people there at CES, we would hope that the blockchain.info page behind us would beep and update while we were talking to them. And then we would have a real world example that we could tell these people, look, somebody just used Bitcoin right now. Somebody in the world is actually using this. It's not just the three of us here at CES telling you about it. Somebody else used it too. And back then the blocks were 5 kilobytes, 10 kilobytes, somewhere in there. And then as more and more people started to use Bitcoin, the blocks went from 5 kilobytes to 10 kilobytes to 20 to 50 to 100, and then 200 kilobytes, and then 400 kilobytes, and then half a megabyte, and then eventually 3/4 of a megabyte. And then to about 6 months ago, they were constantly and consistently at 1 megabyte. And then the price that people had to pay to use a Bitcoin transaction started to go up and up and up. And the blocks have been limited to 1 megabyte since then. And the number of people that can use Bitcoin every 10 minutes have been limited to that size. So if we know for sure that allowing more people to use Bitcoin with fast, cheap, safe, and easy transactions, and the block space per block growing from just a few kilobytes to a megabyte, led to millions and probably more than 10 million people around the world using Bitcoin at this point, there's really, really, really strong reason to think that allowing the block size to go up to 1.1 megabyte would be the right thing to do, because it worked every time for the last 8 years to allow Bitcoin to grow, and it's likely to continue working. So if we know this path has an 8-year track record of working to allow more people around the world to use Bitcoin, don't change it. Bitcoin has this giant networking effect lead because of it, but that can be squandered, and we're seeing it start to be squandered right before our eyes. I never ever even considered buying any altcoins until just recently, when the Bitcoin network became completely full, and transaction fees in some instances began costing more than a credit card transaction would have. So the network effect is incredibly important, but it doesn't trump everything else. And if people have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, it's very, very late where I am. I'm happy to call it a night if not. So, but I want to thank whoever's tuning in or whoever's watching this later. It's amazing to see just how far Bitcoin has come in this time. So thank you guys all.
Yeah, thank you very much, Roger. We really appreciate the opportunity to have you here today. And we're going to take a little break and then come back with Tom Zander and his presentation. So again, thank you, Roger.
And I think there's one last question that just came in from Anthony.
Oh, good.
Maybe I'll answer if that's all right.
Sure,
So,
go for it.
So Anthony wanted to ask, how important do you think it is to reach out to core supporters versus just working our own projects? I think it's really, really important, but at the same time, it should be really, really frustrating to everybody to see how certain core supporters have intentionally put their fingers in their ears and closed their eyes, and they don't want to hear any of the other arguments or the other opinions. And we see that going on very, very clearly by the outright censorship of any sort of dissenting opinion from what's probably the most not only the most popular Bitcoin news source for the general public, which is our Bitcoin on Reddit. It's probably not only the most popular news source, it's probably more popular than every single other Bitcoin news source in the world combined. And the guy who runs that is some guy named Theorem, so nobody knows who he actually is. And it seems really strange that he managed to grab control of so many different Bitcoin-related media outlets, and nobody knows who he actually is. And he absolutely disallows any sort of dissenting opinion on the Bitcoin block size debate. I wrote an article about a year ago explaining exactly why I think bigger blocks means more decentralization, not less. And a lot of people say decentralization, decentralization, decentralization. We need more decentralization. And we can't have, and they argue that we can't have bigger blocks because it might limit or reduce the amount of decentralization. So I wrote an essay explaining exactly why I think bigger blocks will lead to more decentralization, not less. And this person, Thamos, deleted the post right there from our Bitcoin, so that people couldn't even hear my arguments. From the first person in the entire world to start investing in Bitcoin startups, the first person with a decently sized established business to start accepting Bitcoin. I was investing in Bitcoin startups over a year or years before the general VC community started paying any attention to Bitcoin whatsoever. So I put my thoughts into this essay, wanted to share it with the Bitcoin community because I think it's very important. Boom, deleted. Deletes all sorts of posts, deletes all sorts of anything. And then it's really, really frustrating that so many core developers and core supporters won't even condemn this censorship policy. They refuse to say that censorship's a bad thing. And then they claim that Bitcoin is so important that it has to resist, it has to be censorship resistant, when they're busy going around and censoring all sorts of dissenting points of view. So it really, really, really concerns me. Why on earth would we trust anybody to work on the core protocol of Bitcoin if we want Bitcoin to remain censorship resistant, when these same people are openly either supporting censorship or openly refusing to condemn the censorship. To me, that's a really, really scary thing. And it's important that we continue trying to talk to them, but at the end of the day, use whatever currency has the most utility in your own life. And one other small side point that I'd like to point out, the fundamental underlying goal of Bitcoin, it isn't decentralization. The underlying goal of Bitcoin and what makes Bitcoin so incredibly useful is the censorship resistance. And the decentralization is just the tool that we use to achieve the censorship resistance. If there was some other tool that we had available to us that would allow us to achieve the censorship resistance, it would be just fine to use that other tool. I'm not aware of any at the moment that are better than the decentralization to achieve the censorship resistance, but the decentralization is simply the means to the ends of censorship resistance. And a lot of people seem to get sidetracked and think that the decentralization is just the ends in itself, whereas it's just the tool to achieve the censorship resistance. So that's my thought on those issues there. So, and a couple more questions came in. So let's see here. So Peter's asking if I think that there is any malicious motivation from Blockstream regarding preventing Bitcoin growing and going mainstream. I don't think it's malicious. I think they simply, if you look at the backgrounds of pretty much all the people that are part of Blockstream, I don't think any of them that I'm aware of, and I truly apologize if I'm getting this wrong, but I don't think that there's any of them with like actual backgrounds of running successful companies that serve customers around the world. And I don't think that any of them have educational backgrounds in the field of economics. And I think that that's where we see a real big dividing line between people that want to have a market-based approach to the block size and scaling, and people that want to have a bunch of developers just pick a number and decide that that's the maximum block size. And if you look around, it's all the CEOs of businesses that are serving customers around the world. They want Bitcoin to be able to scale on chain and continue on the path for the last 8 years that's allowed Bitcoin to become the big success that it is. And it's a bunch of software developers. I guess I won't name names, but I've met multiple ones of them that are, staunchly in favor of this 1 megabyte limit and say that should never be raised. And they don't even have Bitcoin wallets on their phones. And they claim that people that use Bitcoin wallets on their phone aren't actually using Bitcoin because they don't have a copy of the entire blockchain on their phone, which is just, I think, ridiculous to anybody that looks at what's going on. The more people using Bitcoin, the better. The more people that are in possession of their own private keys for the Bitcoins, the better. But lots of people are using Bitcoin banks, right? Zappo, Coinbase, Circle, those are all Bitcoin banks. And those, look at how many, millions of people they brought to become Bitcoin users. And most of the users, maybe they don't understand the decentralized nature. They don't understand the underlying cool tech that's enabling Bitcoin, but they know that it allows them to send and receive Bitcoin with people anywhere in the world at very low cost up until very recently. And there should be no doubt in anybody's mind that high fees on the Bitcoin network will reduce the number of people that use Bitcoin. And that's a big problem for people that want to see Bitcoin grow around the world. So I don't think it's malicious intent. I think it's just a lack of understanding, and also a lack of even being exposed to the ideas, because there's so much censorship going on the major platforms in the ecosystem. I think a lot of the Blockstream people and core supporters were a bit stunned that SegWit didn't instantly have 90% support, and it's been floundering at somewhere between 20 and 30%. I think that surprised them, and the reason it surprised them is because in their little echo chamber there on our Bitcoin and some of these other places, nobody's allowed to even criticize these sorts of things. So when suddenly it was released and nobody adopted it, I think it caught them off guard. So the censorship damages people on both sides of the argument, because nobody actually has an idea of what the general spirit of the ecosystem is in regards to these sorts of things. So I don't think it's malicious intent, and I really hope it's not malicious intent, but I think it's just a lack of understanding of the underlying economics that have made Bitcoin a success, and solely focusing on some of these other things. And that's my thoughts on that. Thank you for the question, Peter. And the next question here, let's see. So on-chain scaling, which I guess is the conference organizer, is asking, if a hard fork does result in 2 active chains, how do you see the use cases for both chains evolving in tandem? So that little chart that I had up earlier with the list of all the properties that make something good money, whichever chain has those properties better than the other chain, that chain is going to win out in the end. And so if you have one chain that has transactions that take a long time to be confirmed on the network and have very high fees and you know, double spending transactions are very easy, or you have another chain where transactions are confirmed in the next block all the time, the fees are low, double spending is really hard, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind which one is going to be more popular, which one more people are going to use, and which one's going to have a higher value per coin on that network as well. It's not even close. So for anybody that studied economics or business or any of these things, like, it won't even be close. Whichever fork of Bitcoin has the properties that make it good money more than the other one, that fork is going to win out in the end. And they might both persist for a while. I think that's pretty unlikely because the difficulty of Bitcoin adjusts every 2016 blocks, unlike Ethereum that adjusts, I think, every 15 seconds. So I think the likelihood of there being 2 chains for a long time is much, much, much lower with Bitcoin. But even if there are, the one that has the best characteristics to make it useful as money is going to win out in the end. And the next question here from Will. Yeah, good question, Will. So Will's question is, he says that it's clear that SegWit as a soft fork isn't guaranteed to activate in the next 12 months, which is when the deadline for it being activated expires. He's asking me if I think that there's any chance the community could reunite and compromise on the scaling debate in the next year. How can we make that happen? I think before there's even a chance of that happening, the censorship has to end within the Bitcoin community. Before the censorship ends, I think that there's not much chance of that reunification happening at all. If people can't share their ideas and discuss things with each other on an open platform, how can we expect to even know what the other people are thinking? So I think the first step for anybody who even wants or hopes for reunification in the community should be to oppose Thamos and oppose his policies. Ask Reddit to appoint some neutral third-party moderator that doesn't have a stake in the market-based scaling approach versus the command economy scaling for Bitcoin. Like, I think a good person to moderate our Bitcoin on Reddit would maybe be the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I don't think they receive lots of donations of Bitcoin, but I don't think they have a dog in the scaling fight. So maybe if we put them in charge of moderating, and then finally people in the general public will have a place where both sides of the argument can be heard. And so if we want to have a reunification of the community, I think that's the first thing we have to do is end this censorship. And before that happens, I think it's really, really hard. So, and we'll go on to the next question. So next question is from Stein, and he asked if my Bitcoin Unlimited pool is opening to the public soon. Has the pool been attacked so far? I was hoping the pool was going to open to the public. I was hoping back in October, to be honest. It's getting really close. We have over 2% of the global hash rate helping us test the pool. Unfortunately, there's some bugs that are still taking place. Most of those bugs or issues are being caused by the Great Firewall of China, which is another thing that I'm really hoping that in the future people can use Bitcoin to tear down the Great Firewall of China. And the Great Firewall of China doesn't just hurt Chinese people in China. It's a drag on the entire world's economy and slows down the entire world from being able to produce as much wealth as it otherwise would be. And so it makes people inside of China and outside of China poorer than they otherwise would be. And ask any economist anywhere in the world, they'll tell you that the Great Firewall of China is just an absolutely stupid, idiotic thing that's holding back the entire world's progress. So including the development of my Bitcoin Unlimited mining pool as well. So hopefully we'll be opening it to the public this month, but we want to make sure that all the users have a really good experience once it does launch. We don't want to launch too soon and have we don't want to give people a bad user experience. But if you want to support Bitcoin Unlimited today and you have mining equipment, please go and use the Via BTC pool. I just got back from a trip, or left a trip from touring around China with the CEO of Via BTC's pool. Great guy. He understands the economic arguments in regards to Bitcoin and making Bitcoin a success and what makes Bitcoin money. He has a fantastic pool. By all the objective standards at the moment, it's probably, I don't even think I should say probably, it is the most reliable, best pool out there with the lowest latency, the least, I don't think they've had a single orphan block ever. And I don't think that there's any other pools out there that can say that at this point. So go and give the viabtc.com pool a try. That guy really knows what he's doing, and I appreciate his efforts in this space as well. And have we been attacked so far? Not that I'm aware of, other than the Great Firewall of China is an attack on the entire world's economy. So in that sense, we have been attacked. And the next question is from Farklin, and he asks, what are my views on the Lightning Network? I don't think anybody that's in favor of, on-chain scaling and block size being determined by the market, I don't think any of those people are opposed to layer 2 technologies like Lightning Network and colored coins and counterparty and all these things. And a lot of these other layer 2 things, like if you're a fan of counterparty and colored coins, the current block congestion is really, really damaging those projects and really making it hard to use those sorts of things. So look at all the counterparty assets that are out there. They're way more difficult and expensive to use, and that's a direct result of the block congestion at the moment. So Lightning Network, it's great, it's wonderful. I don't have any problem with it. I'm not opposed to it at all. But don't destroy the Bitcoin that we know works and has been working and grown us to where we are today over the last 8 years. Don't destroy that in the hopes of making a Lightning Network that we hope will work, but it's untested and unproven. So don't break something that we know works in the hopes of creating something that might work tomorrow. And that's what I feel a lot of the current core developers are doing, is they're intentionally breaking what makes Bitcoin useful as money in the hopes of creating something else that will be really cool if it all works, but don't break something that's working today because of it. So that's my thoughts on the Lightning Network and other layer 2 technologies. Thank you, Thinklin. And the next question here is a long one, so give me a moment to read that so I can summarize it properly. So Stefan asks, or he comments, he says, Blockstream is a for-profit corporation. Their products are to be sidechain products, and Blockstream has an obligation to their shareholders to maximize the profit. Allowing people and organizations to use the original blockchain will make their profits lower. What do you think about having so many paid developers at one single company? Decentralization is good because it promotes censorship resistance. If you have the vast majority of developers all working at a single company, that does seem to pose a bit of a risk to having some sort of outside entity come in and influence the direction of Bitcoin. Maybe we've seen a little bit of that because of Blockstream. I don't like to dive into conspiracy theories, but sometimes conspiracies are true. I'm not saying that's the case in this one, but I have a really, really hard time seeing how Blockstream is going to make back the $76 million that they received in VC funding. Initially, my thought as to why the investors agreed to invest that much money in the company was maybe that all the investors bought Bitcoin and are holding Bitcoin individually, and they were hoping that side chains and these other things would lock Bitcoin in as the central core of the Bitcoin. They would lock Bitcoin in as the central hub core focus of the entire cryptocurrency ecosystem forever and ever and ever, and basically close the door to any competition from any other altcoin, guaranteeing that the price of Bitcoin will go to hundreds of thousands of dollars of Bitcoin, and that they would profit from that rather than the direct $76 million that they invested in Blockstream. That was my initial theory as to what was going on there. Maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong, I don't know. At this point, I'm really, really, really concerned because most of the core developers at Blockstream are intentionally, whether they know that they're doing it or not, but the policies that they're advocating would damage the underlying characteristics that have brought Bitcoin to where it is today and brought Bitcoin the incredible success that it's had so far. If something's not broken, if something's working incredibly well, don't change things, don't break it. And that's exactly what they're advocating be done. And I don't think that they fully understand or appreciate that. And I wish they would start to understand or appreciate that a bit more. So thank you for the questions, Stefan. And next question is from Tom Z. So that's so Tom's question is in order to change or remove the 1 megabyte limit, it requires a protocol upgrade. He's confident that we're going to see a protocol upgrade soon, and he's asking me if I think it would be healthy if the Bitcoin network were to schedule regular updates like every 18 months, he suggests. And I don't know. There's another currency out there, Monero, that I've had my eye on because it really has Bitcoin beat in the fungibility side of things at the moment. I'm hoping Bitcoin can improve its fungibility in the future. But I know Monero has hard forks scheduled, I think, every 6 months or a year or something like that. And so far, that's worked well for them. It's nice to let other people be the guinea pigs when we have $12 billion worth of value on the line for Bitcoin. But I'm not opposed to hard forks. Ethereum's had lots of successful hard forks, and I think they just had one that resulted in 2 chains. But I think the reasoning for that hard fork was very different. The reasoning for that hard fork wasn't so much to improve the protocol or fix something. It was to basically create a bailout for the people that invested in the DAO, and that most people should be opposed to bailouts. So buyer beware. So I think if Bitcoin were to have a bailout or a hard fork due to a bailout, I think people would be up in arms over it, and rightly so. And we saw that with Ethereum. So to answer your question, I suppose I'm a bit on the fence, but leaning towards, if the protocol needs to be upgraded, it should be upgraded, and the people can decide if they want to upgrade it and run the new software that's been written in order to implement that upgrade. So thank you for the question, Tom. And the next question is from Peter asking, what are my views on Ethereum? I don't actually have that sort of, I don't have particularly strong views on Ethereum. I've been focusing on Bitcoin the whole time. It seems like when I first looked into Ethereum a little bit, the thing that dismayed me a little bit or a lot was when I saw that there wasn't a limited supply of Ethereum. Although I guess it grows, it has a fixed inflation rate, so that's better. If I can call people out by names, I think there's a core developer. I think he works at Blockstream, and it's almost 3 in the morning here, so I apologize if I'm a little bit less on the ball than I would be normally. But Timon, I think is his name, and he's the guy that's behind Freightcoin, I believe, and it has demurrage built in which part of the currency is automatically siphoned away from the users every so often. And he thinks that that's such a wonderful idea, and he thinks that people might actually use it. That's the stupidest thing ever. If you have a money in which you lose part of your money every single year, people aren't going to use it. And ask any economist, they'll tell you people aren't going to use it. If you have money where you lose part of it every single year and you have an option to use something where that's not the case, people are going to use the option where that's not the case. And I got a little bit sidetracked there. I don't have strong views on Ethereum. I'm focused on Bitcoin. But it's scary to me that people that have such ignorant economic views are advocating changing things for Bitcoin. So anyhow, thank you for the question, Peter. And the questions keep coming in. And I think let me look at both of these real quick. I'll only answer one of them. I think I'm going to call it a night because it's so late here. But and my time's getting close to being up too. But yeah, and they're both good questions too. Maybe I'll make time for both of them here. We'll see. So, so the first question here is from Gene, and he says, do you think there's space for small and medium businesses to gain from blockchain, or it depends on bigger efforts? One of my favorite quotes in the entire Bitcoin ecosystem was from Gavin Andreessen early on, and he said, like, something to the effect of, do you feel left out with Bitcoin? What are you waiting for? Look for something that needs to be done and get out there and do it. And that's still where we're at. You know, there's still only a couple million Bitcoin users around the world. There's only maybe a couple hundred Bitcoin businesses around the world that are actively working on Bitcoin related things directly. There's still so much that can be done. And most of these things that are going to be done by businesses that are small. And guess what? Every single big business started small and then grew into a big business. So, you know, the sky's the limit. If you have a good idea, go out there and implement it. And the only way to guarantee that you're going to fail is by not even trying. So if you have an idea, go out there and try it. Start working on it. Start coding. Start building something. Build a website. You know, get other like-minded people together. Go out there and make it happen. So it's when I first got excited about Bitcoin and I started telling people about it, most people said, what are you wasting your time on this stupid stuff for? But here we are today. And I think, you know, I had an effect in getting the word out and getting more people around the world to use Bitcoin. And if I can do it, so can everybody else. So there's still a long way to go. So go out there and get active. And the final question for the night. So to what extent, and this is from Simon, to what extent do you think non-mining nodes have influence over the Bitcoin network? Do you feel that they have sufficient sway to be able to effectively hinder any potential block size increase? I think we've seen pretty recently that the entities that have the most sway, in the Bitcoin network are the pools. I think if the pools don't go along with what people want to do, nothing's going to get done. And it seems like most of the people that are actually doing Bitcoin mining don't follow the day-to-day politics or don't have a strong opinion, especially a lot of the miners in China. They seem to be kind of unaware of this whole block size debate. And sadly, they seem to be really unaware of the censorship that's been going on in the English-speaking world. The number of non-mining nodes that we see out there signaling a particular implementation, and it's nice to see that, but it's also fairly easily faked or influenced, and most people want to be running what they perceive to be the major one. So it's not worth nothing to run a non-mining node to have influence over the Bitcoin network, but it's not nearly as strong as being a pool operator. And that's why when I got frustrated with the stalemate or the lack of scaling fast enough to keep up with demand of Bitcoin, I went out there and have attempted to build a Bitcoin mining pool, and hopefully we can open that to the public here shortly. So if I had to rank things, I suppose pool operator, big businesses that actually are using Bitcoin and serving customers that are using Bitcoin, and then below that, you know, the non-mining nodes. And you know, if we made a bigger list, including developers and other businesses, it would be even more complicated to rank it all. But I think the biggest influencing factor are the mining pools at this point, and that's why I'm building a mining pool, to have a bigger voice in this. So anyhow, thank you everyone who's participating. Thank you everybody who listens later on. It's
thank you, Roger. Really appreciate you being able to come on and talk to us, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you soon.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.